In the luxurious Voss family home, Elowen Vale is stunned by the bloody body of her son, Lysander, collapsed on the floor. Lysander, a promising 19-year-old, has been entangled in a dangerous series of forbidden relationships. Not only has he had a sweet love affair with Ariadne Voss, his same-age girlfriend, but he has also fallen deeply into two sinful relationships with Vivienne, Ariadne's charming, powerful mother, and even with Alaric, her mysterious, cruel father. These secret, wrong, and lustful relationships have created a dangerous, inescapable web. A chain of terrible truths is about to be revealed. Lysander lives with his mother, Elowen Vale, a strong and devoted woman. After her husband died in an accident several years ago, Elowen has devoted all her energy to raising Lysander, hoping that he will have a better life. She never doubts her son and cannot imagine that Lysander is living two lives, one in the light and one in the dark. On the outside, Lysander has a seemingly perfect life. He is in love with Ariadne Voss, his girlfriend of the same age and the person the whole town thinks will have a happy future together. Ariadne is beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious. Her family, especially her mother, Vivienne Voss, is a symbol of success in Greenville. Vivienne, with her charm and power, runs a large real estate company and is always the center of social gatherings. Both Ariadne and Vivienne are people Lysander seems inseparable from. But behind the facade of an ideal relationship, Lysander is caught in a forbidden game he cannot escape. Vivienne, Ariadne's charming mother, is not only a successful model but also a passionate and mysterious woman. She is fascinated by Lysander's youth and uses her power and charm to turn him into her secret lover. At first, Lysander cannot believe that he could be involved in a relationship with Vivienne, a woman much older than him, the mother of his lover. But Vivienne's intense control and passion make him irresistible. She takes possession of him, little by little, drawing Lysander into secret meetings at the luxurious Voss family home, while Ariadne is completely unaware of this terrible secret. Every time Lysander visits Ariadne, he not only meets his lover but also has to face Vivienne, a woman who always looks at him with eyes that would seem to want to devour him. Sometimes, Vivienne's fleeting touches when Ariadne is near make Lysander feel his heart pounding, both from fear and from excitement that he doesn't want to admit. It's a risky game, and he knows that sooner or later things will go too far. However, what Lysander can't expect is that the complicated relationships in the Voss family are even bigger than he imagined. While he is possessed by Vivienne, Alaric Voss, Ariadne's father, is also gradually setting his eyes on him. Alaric, a powerful man with cold eyes, is not someone who can be easily controlled. He had kept his homosexuality a secret for years, and now he saw in Lysander not just a young man, but a potential prey for his long-repressed desires. It all began when Alaric quietly approached Lysander one afternoon, when neither Ariadne nor Vivienne were home. It was a brief moment, but it was enough to trigger an inevitable transformation. Lysander sensed the threat in the way Alaric looked at him, but there was also something in his gaze that made him feel trapped. Alaric, unlike Vivienne, did not use charm to lure Lysander. He used power and control like a ruthless predator, and Lysander could not resist. The relationship between him and Alaric began from there, full of mystery and guilt, taking place in the shadows of the house where both Ariadne and Vivienne lived. Lysander, torn between Vivienne's possessiveness and Alaric's power, felt like he was being pulled into a game with no way out. The Voss house, with its pristine white walls and perfect exterior, now harbors the darkest of secrets. Lysander can't imagine how he got entangled with both his girlfriend's mother and father. But the only thing he knows for sure is that things are spiraling out of control. Lysander can't sleep at night, lying alone in his room. He thinks of Ariadne, whom he once promised to love forever. But at the same time, images of Vivienne and Alaric linger in his mind. Each holds a piece of his soul, and he knows this dangerous game can't go on forever. Every time Lysander passed through the Voss house's grand doors, his heart pounded harder. The house, which the people of Greenville had admired for its wealthy family's perfection, now felt like a trap. Every time he visited Ariadne, he was drawn into a dangerous game of desire and inevitable possessiveness. Vivienne could no longer bear the separation. She felt she was losing control of Lysander. At first, she had been drawn to his youthfulness, but now their relationship had gone beyond physical passion. Vivienne wanted Lysander for herself not just as a secret lover, but as a prized possession. Every glance she gave him warned her that Lysander would not leave her without a price. In their furtive encounters, Vivienne began to demand more. Brief touches turned into long nights in the dark. She wants Lysander all to herself, and constantly hints that he will have everything if he stays with her. Somehow, Vivienne makes Lysander feel like she is the only one who understands him, an escape from his ordinary life and the expectations of his mother, Elowen. The tug-of-war between Vivienne and Alaric made Lysander feel like a puppet being pulled back and forth. He couldn't abandon either, but he couldn't take the pressure from either side. Both Vivienne and Alaric demanded loyalty, and Lysander knew that if either of them found out the truth, everything would fall apart. One summer afternoon, when Lysander went to the Voss house as usual, he began to sense a change in the atmosphere. Vivienne was more tense than usual, her eyes never leaving him even when Ariadne was near. She demanded that Lysander meet her after dinner in her bedroom, as if it were an order. Meanwhile, Alaric whispered to him coldly that he would meet him late at night, after everyone in the house had gone to bed. Lysander couldn't shake the feeling that he was being backed into a corner. Vivienne and Alaric, two powerful and controlling figures, are now forcing him to choose, but he knows that any choice will lead to ruin. That night, after Ariadne had gone to bed, Lysander walked quietly down the hall toward Alaric's study. The dim light from the desk lamp shone through the crack in the half-open door. Lysander stood before the door, his hands shaking as he gripped the handle. He knew what awaited him inside, but he could not resist Alaric's pull. The door opened, and Alaric's cold eyes met his, like a predator that had waited too long. Alaric didn't need to say much. He just stood there, watching Lysander as if he were part of a game he controlled. Lysander felt as if he had no choice. He moved closer, his feet guided by an invisible force. Alaric was not just a forbidden lover, but the master of his life, like a tyrannical king maneuvering his chess pieces. In that moment, as Lysander entered the room and the door closed behind him, the space around him seemed to freeze. But what Lysander did not expect was that, in the hallway outside, Vivienne was standing silently, her eyes filled with confusion and anger. She had been watching Lysander since the beginning of the evening, and what she saw before her eyes shattered every belief she had ever had. Vivienne stood there, her hands gripping the doorframe so hard that they turned white. Her anger was intense, but so was the pain of realizing that not only had her husband betrayed her, but that the young lover she had trusted was no longer hers. Vivienne felt like she had been pushed out of Lysander's life in the most cruel way. In that moment, everything changed. Vivienne turned and walked back to her room, but her mind was restless. She knew that she could no longer live in this lie. She had to act, and she knew that there was only one way to take back what was hers. Vivienne began to make plans. The darkness of the night shrouded the Voss house like a thick curtain, concealing dark secrets that would turn into an irreversible tragedy in a few hours. Inside the luxurious house, the silence was oppressive, as if waiting for something to explode. While Ariadne slept peacefully upstairs, undercurrents were churning beneath the perfect facade of the Voss family. Vivienne sat in her large bedroom, her eyes glued to the large mirror. She saw in it a woman she no longer recognized, eyes red with anger, face twisted by the pain of betrayal. Vivienne had experienced the most painful moment of her life. Her husband, Alaric, the man she had thought would always stand by her, was betraying her with the young lover she had taken. The conflict in her mind made every cell in her body feel like it was about to explode. Vivienne was no longer the charming, powerful, confident woman everyone in Greenville had once admired. She felt pushed to the edge, completely out of control. But the most painful thing was the realization that Lysander, the young man she had used every trick in the book to keep, was no longer hers. Alaric had taken him from her. Anger and betrayal surged like a storm that could not be stopped. Vivienne stood up and walked to the closet. Her hands shook as she opened the drawer, searching for what she knew would be the means to regain what she had lost. She pulled out a sharp knife, the metal glinting in the faint light from the nightlight, making the knife look even more menacing. Vivienne gripped the handle, her hands cold but her mind burning with rage. In a panic and hysteria, Vivienne walked down the stairs toward Alaric's study. The door was still ajar, a clear sign that inside, Alaric and Lysander were meeting. She had witnessed this before. But now, all reason was erased from her. The feeling of betrayal was too great, too painful for her to contain herself. Vivienne stood before the door, feeling her heart pounding. Her hand tightened on the hilt of the knife, cold sweat drenching her palms. The door opened, and before her eyes, the image she could never forgive was clear: Lysander and Alaric, in the space filled with their secrets and sins. Alaric turned his back to Vivienne, and Lysander stood frozen, his eyes horrified when he realized Vivienne was standing there, her eyes filled with anger. Time seemed to stop in that moment. All three stood still. No one spoke, but the atmosphere in the room was thick with hatred and betrayal. Alaric turned his head, his cold eyes showing no surprise or regret. It was as if he had known this would happen. He said nothing, did not move. Alaric looked at Vivienne as if accepting that this was the end, that all three of them could not avoid. Vivienne lunged forward like a predator, her anger exploding. In that brief moment, all reason was lost. The knife in her hand stabbed straight into Lysander, fast and ruthless. He tried to back away, but it was too late. The tip of the knife pierced his flesh, and in a second of agony, blood gushed from the wound, staining the floor. Lysander fell, his eyes filled with horror as he saw Vivienne standing there, her hands shaking but her eyes unwavering. Alaric did nothing. He just stood there staring at the scene before him like an indifferent observer. There was no emotion on his face. Vivienne had stabbed Lysander, and Alaric had done nothing. He did not step forward, did not stop, did not call for help. Perhaps deep down, Alaric knew that this was inevitable, the inevitable end to the dangerous game they had created. Lysander lay there, his body motionless in a pool of blood. Everything around him grew blurry. He felt the cold spreading through him, but he couldn't react. His breathing became labored, and in his final moments, Lysander felt only a blur between excruciating pain and overwhelming numbness. Vivienne dropped the knife to the floor. The metal clanged coldly against the tile, a verdict on herself. Her hands shook uncontrollably, blood smeared on them and on her robe. But instead of panic, a strange feeling gradually overwhelmed Vivienne. She looked down at Lysander and knew that he would never betray her again. He was hers forever. She did not worry about the consequences. With her position and money, Vivienne believed that she could manage to cover up this crime. In her world, power and money could buy the silence of many. She could make up a story, blame other circumstances, and everything would be buried under the perfect cover that she and Alaric had built over the years. Vivienne walked out of the room without hesitation, leaving Lysander's body in silence. A cold, murderous intent lingered in her eyes. To her, her actions were not a mistake, but a necessity to protect her power and secrets. Jealousy and anger had pushed Vivienne down a path of no return, and Lysander was just a victim who had to pay the price for his betrayal. As she walked down the hallway, a cold smile appeared on her lips. Every plan had been calculated. She would use her power, money, and all her connections to cover up this crime. She believed that someone like her with such overwhelming power would not fall easily. It was time for Alaric to understand that he had no choice. Vivienne sat across from Alaric in the living room, looking straight at her husband, a man who was drowning in fear. Alaric said nothing, his eyes filled with uncertainty and panic after what had just happened. He understood his position clearly. Vivienne, the once gentle and intelligent wife, had now become a terrifying manipulator. She knew all his secrets, and that was the weapon she used to force him. In a low but murderous voice, Vivienne revealed that she had known about his secret relationship with Lysander for a long time. She had been watching, silently observing Alaric's every move, and now she had everything she needed to destroy him if necessary. Alaric's unforgivable betrayal had turned him into a pawn in Vivienne's hands. She reminded him, without mercy, that if he did not help her conceal Lysander's death, the truth would be revealed. At that time, Alaric would not only lose his honor but also face complete collapse. Alaric, pushed into a dark corner with no way out, understood that he had no choice. He would have to stay silent, obey Vivienne's every command. She had complete control over the situation, not only over the new crime but also over Alaric's career and life. Alaric contacted Vincent, who handled the dark affairs that no one dared to touch. He arrived that night, as silent as a ghost. With emotionless eyes, he cleaned up Lysander's body while Alaric stood still, like a lifeless doll controlled by Vivienne's hand. Alaric's mind was blank, no longer able to resist. He knew that, from this moment on, he was trapped in Vivienne's deadly game. Outside, Elowen, Lysander's mother, spent the night anxiously searching for her son. When she arrived at the Voss family home, her instincts told her that something was wrong, and the horrifying truth dawned on her. Her son's body was being quietly taken out of the house by a stranger. Elowen had no doubt. Lysander was dead, and his death was directly linked to the Voss family. Without hesitation, Elowen called the police. In the silence that was terrifying, she began to prepare for the battle to get justice for her son. The secrets that Vivienne and Alaric had tried to hide could not go unpunished. In the Voss family mansion, the silence was broken by the sound of police sirens echoing throughout the neighborhood. Vivienne sat calmly in the living room, her sharp eyes fixed on the window. She had prepared carefully for the cover-up. Money, power, and social connections would help her hide the truth, as they had so often done before. But perhaps this time things had gotten out of hand. Alaric, sitting beside her with a pale face, could not hide his fear. He knew that Vivienne's plan might not work this time. The relationship with Lysander, Vivienne's control, and now his death, all were dragging them into a quagmire with no way out. Vincent, the man hired to dispose of the body, had been discovered when Elowen Vale, Lysander's mother, had followed and reported it to the police. When the police entered, the atmosphere was tense and suffocating. Elowen stood behind them, her eyes red with pain but full of determination. She knew that nothing could bring her son back, but justice must be served. Vivienne, with her cold and proud exterior, still believed that she could escape any consequences. She believed that her power was great enough to overcome any challenge, but the reality was different. Alaric, the husband she had believed would always stand by her, could no longer bear the pressure. In the last moment, he broke down, choosing to betray Vivienne to save himself. Alaric revealed all the dark secrets about the murder, about their forbidden relationship with Lysander, and how Vivienne forced him to cover up the crime. Vivienne did not say a word. Her eyes became lifeless as she listened to her husband's testimony. Every plan, every power she had ever held, now shattered before her eyes. She knew she had lost. In court, Vivienne remained as haughty as ever, but no one looked at her with the same admiration as before. When the verdict was announced, Vivienne Voss and Alaric Voss were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's gavel rang out, bringing to an end the tragedy of blood and betrayal of the Voss family. Vivienne, once powerful and confident, was now a sinner, imprisoned in shame and destruction. Elowen Vale, though heartbroken, found some peace in seeing those responsible for her son's death punished. The curtain fell on a dark story, closing the lives of people who once thought that power could cover up all sins.